Will the Lord be with you? Hi, my name is Craig Newman, and I am the pastor at South Roanoke United Methodist on the Valley Ridge District, and I serve as an elder. It's good to be with you. I've been asked to provide a bit of a primer, to lay a little bit of a foundation as you are collecting your thoughts around the exercise of preparing and delivering sermons. Some of you have a wealth of experience, others of you may be just getting your feet wet and still learning some of these rhythms. Regardless, I hope to provide a little bit of some fodder to kind of generate some thought as we do this kind of holy work together. If you were to go into a lot of churches and a lot of places, you may find fastened to either the pulpit or the lectern somewhere a brass plaque. And oftentimes on that plaque is inscribed the words, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." It's a quote that comes to us from John's Gospel, and it's this passage where some Greeks approach Jesus' disciples, asking to spend some time with Jesus. They've heard so much about him, they've heard about the miracles, they've heard about the healings, and so they want to spend some time with him. Now, luckily, over the years, these plaques have been updated to include something like, "Sir" or "Madam, we wish to see Jesus." But you get the point, right? It's a powerful reminder to those who are stepping into that pulpit, who are stepping into that space, that's what any worshiper who comes to an act of Christian worship is hoping and seeking. They wish to see Jesus. They hope to have a meaningful encounter with the living God. And that's our task. That's our challenge that's before us. And it's an awesome responsibility. It's a tremendously difficult and daunting one at times, but it's our task. This is the charge given to us. And so with that in mind, I wanted to share some exercises, some things to put into place to ensure that you can approach this work with a level of integrity, so that it ensures you do this work responsibly and do this work well. Because there are inevitably going to be those weeks that you just do not have the time and the attention that you would like to be able to devote to your sermon. There may be those weeks where you have 3 back-to-back funerals and you have a wedding on Saturday and you just do not have the time. You don't have the hours that you wish to have to be able to give the time and effort that a sermon deserves to it. So how then do you prepare a sermon in those weeks with the same level of integrity, the same level of professionalism, the same level of spirit-infused dedication and commitment? Some things that might help you as you kind of do this work is to have in the back of your mind the good news. That ought to be clearly stated. That ought to be really the takeaway, that folks can clearly identify what is the good news in the passage that you're preaching on. Whether you're preaching on an Old Testament text or a New Testament text, whether you're preaching and focusing on the ministry of Jesus or Paul or Esther, the good news ought to be explicitly clear. Another good thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind is the 3 what questions. Ask yourself, as you're preparing a sermon, does your sermon answer the question, what? What about this passage? Then ask yourself the question, so what? Now that you've identified something, so what? Why is this intriguing? Why does this have some sort of influence over me as a believer? And the third question is, now what? What are the next steps? What's perhaps an invitation to deeper discipleship? So ask yourself those questions. What, so what, and now what? And last but not least, a great question to pose is, did Jesus Christ have to die and be raised from the dead in order for what I'm saying to be true? That can be a humbling question to ask, but a question that's worth asking. There's a story of an American minister who was traveling overseas in Scotland, and he found himself in the countryside one afternoon and kind of just wandering around, and he came upon this grand old church. He knocked on the door, and there was nobody there, but the doors were open, unlocked. So he let himself in and kind of made himself at home. He walked around in that space. He was just amazed at how beautiful the architecture was, and And just he felt as though the walls just kind of oozed this kind of sacredness. Now the lights were off in that sanctuary, and so it was kind of a dark, shadowy space, but he noticed a glimmer, something shiny off in the distance, and so he walked a little closer. And he noticed that shiny thing was attached to the pulpit. It was one of those brass plaques that said, "Sir or Madam, we wish to see Jesus." Looking around and noticing that there was nobody there, it was mid-afternoon on a weekday, the man thought, well, what would it hurt for me climbing into that pulpit and trying it on for size? So he did just that. He climbed into that ornate pulpit. He went up the spiral staircase and he stood there and he looked out over what would have been the congregation in this imaginary scenario, and he took a deep breath and he was just about to belt out some word of proclamation, and he looked down again at that brass plaque and he noticed it didn't say what he thought it did. Instead, it said, "Remember Edna Bailey." It was a memorial plaque. Feeling a little deflated and a little embarrassed, the man went away. But later that afternoon, it hit him. It struck him that this was a lesson being taught to him by God. It was this lesson that in order to help people see Jesus, we also need to help them see the Edna Baileys of the world. Not just the Edna Baileys, but the James Smiths and the Maria Reeves and the so on and the so forth. So as you're preparing sermons, how can you communicate the good news? How can you answer such questions as the what's, the so what's, the now what's? How can you answer the question, does what I have to say, is that as powerful as someone laying down their life for the forgiveness of sins? That's the challenge before us. And are you communicating in a way that reaches the widow who laid to rest her spouse of 55 years earlier that week, just as well as it does to that young, enthusiastic, energetic new seeker who's just freshly coming to the faith? Does it also speak to maybe that person who's a bit reserved or stubborn, who felt dragged to church that day by their significant other? It's up to you to kind of do this work, this holy work. Mary Oliver, the great poet, she was asked about poetry just kind of in the abstract, and of course her way with words, she said something really eloquent, really that made quite an impression on me. I want to share it with you. When asked about poetry, she said that poetry is a life-cherishing force. For poems are not merely words after all, but they are fire for the cold. They are a rope ladder being let down to the lost. There is something as necessary as bread in the pockets of the hungry. Now, when I heard that quote, I thought, oh, what if we were to substitute the words preaching and sermons for the words poetry and poems? Listen to it again. Preaching is a life-cherishing force. For sermons are not just words, after all, but they are fire for the cold. They are ropes let down for the lost, and they are something as necessary as bread in the pockets of the hungry. So friends, bless you as you do this work, and may you do it well, with humility, with reverence, and of course, may you be enveloped by the Holy Spirit. Bless you and bless the work that's before you.